On June 26, 2001, the African Union, AU, made of 55 member states was formed with Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as its headquarters. The Union was officially established on 9 July 2002 as a successor to the Organization of African Unity, OAU. In July 2004, the African Union's Pan-African Parliament, PAP, was relocated to Midrand in South Africa. But the African Commission on Human and People's Rights remained in Addis Ababa. When it comes to minerals, Africa is believed to hold 90% of the world's cobalt, 90% of its platinum, 50% of its gold, 98% of its chromium, 70% of its tantalite, 64% of its manganese, and 1/3 of its uranium. The Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, has 70% of the world's coltan, a mineral used in the production of tantalum capacitors for electronic devices such as cell phones. The DRC also has more than 30% of the world's diamond reserves. Guinea is the world's largest exporter of bauxite. As the growth in Africa has been driven mainly by services and not manufacturing or agriculture, it has been growth without jobs and without reduction in poverty levels. In fact, the food security crisis of 2008, which took place on the heels of the global financial crisis, pushed 100 million people into food insecurity. In recent years, the People's Republic of China has built increasingly stronger ties with African nations and is Africa's largest trading partner. In 2007, Chinese companies invested a total of $1 billion in Africa. A Harvard University study led by Professor Callistus Juma showed that Africa could feed itself by making the transition from importer to self-sufficiency. Let's have a backstory of how Africa got colonized. The scramble for Africa between 1870 and 1914 was a significant period of European imperialism in Africa that ended with almost all of Africa and its natural resources claimed as colonies by European powers, who raced to secure as much land as possible while avoiding conflict amongst themselves. The partition of Africa was confirmed at the Berlin Conference of 1885, without regard for the existing political and social structures. Almost all the pre-colonial states of Africa lost their sovereignty, exceptions being Liberia, which had been settled in the early 19th century by formerly enslaved African Americans and was recognized as independent by the United States in 1862, but was viewed by European powers as being in the United States' sphere of influence, and Ethiopia, which won its independence at the Battle of Adwa, but was later occupied by Italy in 1936. Britain and France had the largest holdings, but Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Portugal also had colonies. By 1977, 50 of 54 African countries had gained independence from European colonial powers. Despite the fact that African countries have gained their independence, some European countries still find Africa interesting and have succeeded to keeping ties with African countries one way or another. Recently, the Sahel, a region 3,860 kilometers wide located south of the Sahara Desert and stretching east-west across the African continent, has been a focus of attention around the world. In the last decade, issues such as terrorism, insecurity, and trafficking have characterized the region. Military takeovers have been a major source of concern in the region and beyond in the last few years. Since 2020, the region has had 4 successful coup d'états and 3 failed ones. The coup in Niger particularly attracted attention. This is because Niger was seen as a darling of the West and a model for democratic governance in the region. Despite the challenges facing the region, the scramble for the Sahel remains intense. The main actors in this scramble are the European Union, France, Russia, China, and the United States. The EU relies on Sahel countries, especially Niger, to stop mass illegal immigration into the bloc. Niger is a major transit country in the region. Niger had security and defense partnerships with the EU until recently, when the country unilaterally cancelled the deals. This is a source of concern to the EU. The big question is, why are these foreign powers interested in the Sahel? Foreign powers' interest in the Sahel is driven by its great natural resources and strategic location for security and illegal migration control. These foreign powers all have their reasons to get involved in the scramble for the Sahel. Let's talk about some foreign powers and their reasons getting involved in the scramble for Sahel. Most of the countries in the Sahel region were colonized by France. Unlike Britain, France has maintained strong links with former colonies. They cooperate in the economy, defense and resource extraction, to mention a few areas. France has the first right to buy any natural resources discovered in all its former colonies. Although the relationship between France and its former colonies appeared cordial, recent coups in Francophone countries and anti-France sentiments across Africa have revealed the opposite. The coups have been followed by large demonstrations against France. Despite these cracks, France is keen to maintain its grip on these countries, especially pertaining to military cooperation and resource extraction. France was reluctant to pull its military out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger despite the countries severing military partnerships. It continues to extract natural resources in these countries. Relationships between Russia and many Sahel countries were established during the Cold War and colonial era. More recently, the emphasis by Western countries on human rights, especially during counterterrorism operations, has pushed Sahel countries closer to Russia. While Western allies demand the rule of law, democracy, and human rights in return for security and economic support, Russia portrays itself differently. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 also increased Russia's interest in the Sahel, because it is keen to maintain allies in Africa. Russia openly backed military regimes in Mali and Burkina Faso, and warned against any military intervention in Niger when the military took power. Furthermore, the Wagner Group, the controversial private military company which is controlled by Russia, cooperates with some countries in the Sahel. Niger has cancelled defense agreement with the EU and switched to Russia. All of these factors explain Russia's interest in the Sahel. Like Russia, China portrays itself as an alternative to the traditional ally, France, of Sahel countries. With a mantra of non-interference and respecting sovereignty, China has entrenched itself as a partner of countries in the Sahel. The Sahel region is rich in natural resources such as oil, uranium, natural gas, and lithium. Chinese state-owned enterprises operate in Niger, Chad, Mali, and Burkina Faso. For instance, Mali potentially has one of the largest lithium reserves in the world, and China's Ganfeng Lithium has invested heavily in the country. In addition, despite China's development in military hardware, most of the weapons are untested. China is keen to use the conflicts in the Sahel to test its arms products. In 2019, the US opened its largest drone base in Africa in Agadez, Niger. Unlike France and China, which both have extensive economic interests in the Sahel, the US has a strong military interest. Niger, in particular, is strategically located, and the US can easily fly surveillance and reconnaissance drones from the country to cover the Sahel, West, and Central Africa. As France is being militarily dislodged by its former colonies in the region, the US has been trying to fill the void to prevent Russia and China from establishing further military presence. The US took several months to label the military takeover in Niger coup, so as not to lose strategic military cooperation and dominance. The year 2023 has been particularly challenging for the countries in the Sahel. With issues ranging from economic instability to insecurity, the region remains fragile. Despite the instability and fragility, the scramble for the region remains intense, with traditional allies, such as France, losing its grip and other powers stepping up. For years, coups were used to oust leaders that did not abide to the Western rules, but for over the last 3 years, the African Sahel region has witnessed a wave of coups d'état in 7 countries that extend from Guinea on the Atlantic Ocean to Sudan on the Red Sea. Coups that were not meant to install puppet leaders, but rather to remove puppet leaders from their role. 5 military coups succeeded in 5 countries: Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Niger, and Gabon, while 3 other nations, Tunisia, Chad, and Sudan, had constitutional coups. During approximately the same period, coup attempts were thwarted in Gambia, the Central African Republic, Sierra Leone, and the island nation of São Tomé and Príncipe. Many motives and circumstances have been cited for these coups, as putschists accuse the ruling regimes of corruption, economic mismanagement, and failure to confront armed separatist and jihadi movements that constitute a serious challenge to the region's states. Disparate international reactions to these coups also point to the complexities of the intense regional and international competition between interested major powers. France, and the United States to a lesser degree, adheres to supporting elected governments in countries that experienced coups for reasons that do not necessarily have anything to do with supporting democracy, but rather with the isolated authorities' compatibilities with their own interests. On the other hand, other international players, led by Russia, have found opportunities to enhance their influence by supporting the emergent regimes and the new power brokers, exploiting the region's growing wave of discontent with the West. The African countries that had successful military coups have common borders and share the same accusations of security and economic failures and widespread corruption directed at democratically elected governments. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, coup leaders said that their motives were related to the deterioration of security and the spread of corruption, and that the army bears the responsibility of making necessary changes in governance. The structure of the state is also similar in those nations that underwent coups, with many having fragile institutions and the military in a powerful position, in addition to long histories of political and security problems. In Mali, Guinea, and Niger, the armies were affected by internal and external pressures. Regional organizations, such as the African Union and ECO de l'Ouest, intervened in Mali, and France rejected the Guinea coup, and more strongly, that of Niger. This was accompanied by increased opportunities for mercenaries from the Russian Wagner Group to exploit the growing chaos and violence in the region. It is obvious that France and the United States are out for their own personal benefit in the scramble for the Sahel regions, and this had been noticed by the countries in the region. Since the coups, they have been slowly pushing France and the United States away from their territory and aligning more with Russia. Russia has gained a strong presence in several regions of Africa, starting in the Central African Republic and moving to Libya in the north, and is currently working to strengthen its influence in the Sahel region with its geopolitical status as a depository of mineral resources. After Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea, Niger's turn has come to join those moving away from France and the United States. The coup leaders may not necessarily express their bias toward Russia, but the removal of 2 major French allies from government, Issoufou and Bazoum, is a victory for Moscow, which has adopted a policy of non-interference in domestic affairs while providing assistance in arms, security, and food and development as a whole. Even if the coup leaders won't necessarily come out to tell the world they chose Russia, it is already evident that their support goes to Russia.